Hi, thank you so much for joining us. My name's Kari Pitkin. I'm going to be hosting this town hall today. I actually don't work at the door. I work at WNYC. I'm the executive producer of Radio Rookies. And before we get started with the conversation, we're just going to have everyone introduce themselves so you get a sense of who you're going to be hearing from today.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Weingartner. I'm the CEO of The Door and Broome Street Academy.
Sorry, always some tech snag. I'm Kavya Viswanathan. I'm the Managing Director of the Legal Services Center at The Door.
Hey everybody, my name is Melissa Silverman. I'm the head of school at Broome Street Academy, the Doors Charter High School.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juan David. I'm a recent graduate from the EMT program at The Door.
Awesome. So just to explain a little bit about my connection to The Door, because I think it will be relevant in this moment. I've been working in New York City with young people in different capacities for over 20 years. And The Door, before I actually went there, was this kind of mythical place that you sent kids who needed, you know, legal services or housing or reproductive health care. I mean, in my work at Radio Rookies, if you're not familiar with the program, we make documentaries with young people. So I'm a journalist. I do youth development, but it's really kind of like alongside my work. It's not necessarily always at the center. So WNYC is 2 blocks north of The Door, and to have a place that close where you can turn to when you need really sort of immediate services for young people has been just miraculous. And when COVID hit, when I was thinking about the people and the places that I sort of immediately thought of kind of what's happening in New York, who's being impacted, and what are we losing right now? One of the places I thought about was The Door, because when you walk into that space, that physical space of there's, you know, people there's a dance party over there. There's some kids who are getting meals. There's a cooking class. There's DJing. It's a physical space. It's called The Door. So I thought, well, what happens when this has to go remote? And so I guess we're going to start with some questions for Eric. But if you could talk a little bit about that initial phase, that switch over, how were you guys able to pivot and what was most effective? Like, what were you able to do?
Sure. Well, thanks, Kari, and thank you for doing this. The Door remains a mythical place. It's an electric, and there's a visceral feel. There's something visceral when you walk in the door. You have 6 floors of teeming services, and you know it was not lost on us that the transition to a remote environment would be difficult. We were a couple weeks ahead of the curve in terms of the city, in terms of knowing that we had to shut down, and made a really important technology investment across The Door and through our school to put as much as we possibly could into a virtual environment. And every department at The Door kept functioning. Healthcare, career and ed, our legal services team, our support for homeless youth, all of it kept active, though in a different format. And we've largely been closed. I guess over the course of this discussion, we'll talk a little bit about our plans to reopen. But every department pushed to a virtual environment, and we kept seeing patients in the healthcare space. We kept going on mental health. Our school ran an educational platform online. And we couldn't let kids come to us where, you know, typically 800 to 1,200 kids are in the building a day for a variety of different reasons. That was not an option. So we did as much as we could to push into a community. And now we're just starting to think about what reopening looks like. By and large, we were connecting with hundreds of kids a week, but we never thought that it was a substitute for what happens in person. It was trying to keep the most vulnerable kids that were in our purview connected to things that they needed, whether or not it was mailing them medicines or doing telehealth visits online or continuing training on the computer. We were running all over the city to try and facilitate cases in our immigration department that were open. All of that kept going, but all in a very different way. And now we are just starting to think about what it means to reopen. And towards the end of this month and the beginning of July, we will do a skeletal reopening. All of which will be done against the guidelines that the governor allows us to do in terms of safety for our staff and for our young people. But beginning the end of this month, early next month, we'll start to do emergency food on site. We'll start to take some added appointments at our health center. We've been doing, from the perspective of healthcare, we've been doing somewhere between 100 and 150 cases a week, which is about 50% of our capacity. But we've been doing primary care, modified physicals, some sick visits. We've been connecting kids to prescriptions and eyeglasses, but all of that will start to open up as we get towards the end of the month. We're thinking about this in terms of what does our space have to do to be compliant in terms of social distancing. And so we're thinking about what does our physical plant have to look like? But overall, our connectivity to kids in each department of the door kept moving. And we just tried to be creative to keep things active while we were fundamentally closed to in-person visits.
Can you talk a little bit as you think about sort of looking ahead strategically? Because I mean, you're talking about sort of what the on the ground decisions about reopening, but thinking sort of a little bit further out, can you talk a little bit about what you're imagining?
So, I mean, I think that we knew very early on that this was not a couple months and then we'd be done with it. And we are pretty sure that we're going to have to think differently for a year, maybe more to come. In partnership with our staff and our board, we are actually doing a strategic plan for 18 months just to be focused on the complexities and the scenarios that we're going to have to face vis-a-vis COVID. Kari, there are three sort of intersecting areas that I think are going to be the most critical for us to think about. One is what is potentially our change in revenue that allows us to ramp up or ramp down programs. The second is what are the restrictions that are going to guide us vis-a-vis what we can do in person versus virtually? And that's just a function of the pandemic. And then the third is what do we have to do operationally? What do we have to do from an administrative standpoint to be able to prop up programming? And so the intersection of the three of those will push us to spend the summer working with all of our staff, our board, and a lot of our external stakeholders to figure out what are our options. What do we do if the school has to be at half capacity and we have to platoon kids? What do we do for staff that don't have daycare, whose kids are at home, but they're nurses in our health center? How do we accommodate for that? What do we do if the city's tax levy, if they have to make really tough choices and some of our programs are scaled down? What do we do both from a programmatic standpoint, but also from a staffing perspective to sort of match those gaps? And so we're going to try to blend those three together to come up with what we think is the most responsible way to be prepared for any scenario, whether or not the pandemic ramps down or ramps up. If revenue ramps down or ramps up, we're trying to be thoughtful about what to do. Our staff has been remarkable. Everybody's been flexible. We've had no layoffs. We're going to conclude the fiscal year healthy. We're going to start the next fiscal year with a projection to be healthy. But as the board and I had a conversation this week, our budget heading into next year is a placeholder that will clearly have fluctuations. But I think, you know, the thing that we've been stressing to our staff, and we just have to be there for 10, 11,000 young people who rely on the door a year. And as the city recovers, the door is a really unique combination of programming that is fundamentally going to be at the center of recovery for young adults. And as Kavya will tell you about the complexity of the cases of the kids that she sees in the legal department, Melissa will say the same about the young people in our school. We don't have an option to be insecure from a programming standpoint. We have to be ready to go under every circumstance, whether or not it's in person or remote. And we're sort of, we sort of got there remotely, but we'll sort of be prepared to go either way. No matter what happens with the pandemic.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know at WNYC we've been having a lot of conversations around race and equity, and the larger national conversation around Black Lives Matter. I'm curious what's been happening within the door and how you're thinking about it, and whether you see some changes at all.
Yeah, I mean, so, the issues related to race and equity, if you're committed to this work and you're a staffer at the door, this is not the first time that these issues have been central to the way that we think about programming, the way that we think about those issues, the way that we think about systemic racism, the way that we think about Black Lives Matter. In January, long before George Floyd was murdered, we put together a race, equity, and inclusion work group that was starting to tackle exactly these issues. And we've obviously amplified what we're doing there to be responsive to staff, to young people, and how we think about programming. There are 6 subcommittees that are driving how we're thinking about this work, including program design, staff development, program evaluation, our culture, our learning, our organizational structure. I was in an affinity group 2 hours ago on exactly the learning that I need to do as a leader, but all of us need to do. So it's as you would expect, a dominant theme of how everyone on staff is thinking about this work, thinking about the work that we need to do individually as an organization to be positioned as a leader on this issue, because this is not going to be a moment in time for us where it's up and down. This will be long-term embedded in the DNA, and has been, in terms of how we think about this work. But all of us have a ton of work to do. I'm obviously mindful of making sure that the door can be constructive and productive in the way that we can do best. And we produce meaningful outcomes for young adults in 7 or 8 big categories. That is a massive contribution that we can make to this movement. But we want to be a city leader on this, both inside and out. And so we're really prepared to do it. And it's front and center in terms of how we're thinking about everything. It's driving where we are.
Thank you. All right, just to switch over, I want to talk to Juan David. Just can you unmute yourself just so we're sure we don't have a lag? David, could you tell us a little bit about how you got to be involved in the door? Just like, how did you first hear about it? What was your first point of contact?
So I actually had a friend. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So I actually had a friend. He was a part of the EMT class last year, and he actually told me about the door and some of the services they offer. One thing that really hooked me was, see, I'm a rapper, and he told me they have a studio downtown, and I was like, oh, that sounds awesome, So, so then, he put me on. I met Rashim and everybody, and then I joined the class immediately. I took advantage.
That's awesome. And so you started out with music, and then signed up for the EMT training. Is that right?
Yeah, because at the time I was gonna join, but I was in college, so I had to wait for the following cycle. But I actually wanted to be an EMT for a while. I didn't really know how to get my foot into the door, So like I saw that as the perfect opportunity, and I couldn't pass that up.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about what this past 3 months has been like for you personally, just with the shutdown of COVID. What's been going on for you?
Well, the thing is, like, obviously being in a classroom environment, I feel like it's much more constructive, just because, you have your other students there. You can stay after class, go over the material and whatnot. And once we kind of switched over into virtual, it was uncertain about how long we were actually going to be doing it this way. And I was worried because I didn't think, I was worried that maybe my grades would drop. And then once COVID really turned on, me and my family, we had some financial issues and, and whatnot. But everyone at the door was really supportive. They were able to help me out with some personal issues. And after some minor adjustments, with the virtual training, it was fine. I got comfortable. I was still able to use my instructor as a resource. He made himself available, even with, outside of the school hours. So it was really no problem.
That's great. What happens next for you in the training?
So I just finished my practical exam. The last step, I'll have to take my state exam, and then I'll be certified.
Congratulations. That's
Thanks,
really exciting. And the pandemic and sort of when you joined to be an EMT, we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic with New York at one point at the epicenter of that. Did that change your thinking about this work that you're sort of training to do?
Well, not really. It kind of reinforced, like, the thing is, like, I feel like my personality, I don't really get grossed out really easily, and I like to help people. So it kind of, seeing like what happened and the fact that we were understaffed and underfunded, like it kind of pushed me more, like I really want to be able to, to help out. And plus my friend, he was telling me firsthand what's going on, like, and it was just wild. But no, it definitely motivated me even more to, to continue this career.
That's great. Just in terms of the door itself, I'm curious how it compares to other youth development or youth organizations that you've come across. To me, it always seems so unique, but I'm curious from your perspective as a young person, how you see that.
Well, I'm not really familiar with other youth programs, like, especially in high school. I've never, it's just a shame that, we were never like, linked to these kind of things. The only thing I would say was kind of close was we had a rec center, St. Mary's Rec, but it was really, more for play, like for basketball. It kind of allowed us, young people to have an outlet, and in a safe environment. That was cool. But in terms of careers and anything, there's nothing I come across just quite like it.
Well, good. I'm glad the music hooked you in. That's how we get you. Thank you so much. Okay, so now switching over to Kavya. I know that obviously your department is legal, but I understand that you have also sort of a broader sense of what's been going on. And I know in my work at Radio Rookies, we're seeing a lot of different ways that the pandemic and this current moment and the struggle for racial justice has been affecting kids in all kinds of ways, some of it really hard. I'm curious how you guys are trying to understand sort of where your members are and what's happening with them.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think this is a very unique moment in time in so many ways. I think specifically on the racial justice point, our young people are the reason we all do this work, and they, always inspire, and they're really fired up. They're angry, they're frustrated, not just about like racial injustice that's, come very starkly to light after the killing of George Floyd, but also about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected communities of color and more low-income communities. And they've seen it with like family members getting sick and not getting the necessary treatment, or losing their jobs and not being able to support themselves and like care for parents and siblings and pay for tuition. So they're very angry, but also, which I think is like the beautiful part about working with young people, they're also really motivated to change things, and they believe that they can change things. So within the door, we've done like a lot of things to kind of channel that energy. A lot of our young people want to protest. They've been protesting and they plan to keep protesting. So we've done a bunch of workshops on how to protest safely and know your rights, so that they can go out there and express their rights and their political views without having to fear for arrest. We're partnering with a great local organization called Youth Represent, so that if any of our young people do have encounters with law enforcement, Youth Represent's going to be able to step in and help them navigate that, so that they can feel more confident about, kind of their civic action. Within the door, we're holding a lot of different spaces for conversation. Our programming and center space department still virtually, hold daily space for young people to just like share exactly what they're feeling and drop in. We have a weekly community meeting. And then sort of like the longer term thing is we're launching a very intense voting and civic engagement campaign to talk to young people about civic engagement, to normalize voting, to help people get registered and understand the process. So really trying to empower our young people as much as possible to be able to make a change.
That's awesome. It's definitely, yes, there is such a mix of, like you said, there's anger, but there is hope in all of that. I'm curious, sort of pivoting now to your work specifically in legal, if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing in the past 3 months, and if there's any specific I don't know, cases or things that you think are worth highlighting?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is, and I think this holds true for the door and legal more broadly, is one of our strengths is the ability to be nimble. I think we talk a lot about our organization is we're there to serve a need. And so we need to be able to identify what that need is and adapt our programming accordingly. So, obviously, once the pandemic hit, we moved to remote services. Within legal, one thing that immediately became clear to us was that there was a huge demand now from young people to figure out, are they eligible for certain kinds of benefits and unemployment? And if they are, how do they go about enrolling? And, could that in some way, for legal, we primarily work with immigrant youth, but also door youth more broadly, but especially for our immigrant youth, there's a lot of concern about like, am I eligible for a stimulus check even though I'm undocumented? Or if I try to sign up for unemployment benefits, is that somehow going to, adversely impact my immigration case down the line? So very quickly, we sort of switched some of our regularly scheduled legal programming to providing clinics and hotlines where young people could talk to an attorney and figure out whether they were eligible for certain kinds of benefits, and then get help actually applying for and enrolling in those benefits. Another thing we did, one of the just most immediate needs that we saw, again, this is more specific to our immigrant youth, they've been left out entirely from any sort of federal funding and safety net. So among all of the young people we serve, in many ways, they're the most vulnerable at this time. They're the least likely to have health insurance. They're the least likely to be getting a stimulus check. They're the least likely to be able to work legally, even if there was a job available. So we very quickly, made a push towards setting up emergency cash assistance for immigrant youth so that we could directly help as many people as possible and have like a meaningful impact on like their day-to-day needs. Because what they were telling us is, now's not the time we're really thinking about our legal cases. Like, we need to pay the rent, we need to buy groceries, like we need to pay a medical bill. And so we felt it was really important to quickly be able to support them in those ways. I would say that some of the things I hope that we've done, I hope we leave behind after COVID. We've had attorneys like biking around the city to, meet clients in parks to get documents signed and drop things off at courts that are still like requiring filings. I don't think anyone wants to keep doing that long term. But other things I hope we really do keep doing, like we've established a hotline. The door, even more broadly than legal, has been really getting a lot of traction from a text line, which is like so great and something that I think we should definitely keep doing even when we're not operating remotely. And then I think what I said about benefits, like that's really a need that, we've identified and that we don't think is going to go away, and that we hope to continue like expanding that work.
That all sounds like the definition of nimble and the biking. I can see it all. So now switching over to Broome Street Academy, Melissa, as someone who works with young people, as a parent, I've been obsessed with what is happening and not happening in education. So I would just, to start, love to just hear kind of a little bit of an overview from you, and then I have some very specific questions now.
Yes. It was a pretty radical shift for us. And as you know, schools are founded on this concept of, we say, little red schoolhouse, go to school. And so part of the experience that we valued, because we believe in deep connections with young people at Broome Street Academy, was being in person and checking in and making sure that we could see people directly. And so, it was a seismic shift for us to imagine how do you do high school from your kitchen table? And how do I lead high school from my kitchen table? And so it's been lots of lessons learned. I would say that we very early on chose to have 3 strong pillars associated with our approach to this pivot. And for us, it was conquering the digital divide. So we were going to be certain that no young person who attends Broome Street Academy had a computer problem. So some people don't have one at home. You don't need one. A lot of people use their phone, and they use them at school. And so for us, that was critical. and it's one we worked very hard on. At this point, we have loaned or scholarshiped over 100 machines to Broome Street Academy students. And I'll just point out that, as Eric mentioned, Broome Street, along with the door, was planning for closure before the Department of Education announced theirs. And so we were able to have very real, honest conversations with our young people that on this date, we would probably very likely 99% be closing. And so there was a lot of opportunity for in-person transitions, for young people to get handed laptops. And I believe that that contributed to the second pillar for us, which is social emotional learning and trauma-informed care. And at Broome Street Academy, we're deeply committed to making sure that young people feel okay before they get to do the work they're interested in and their goals for the future. And so part of letting them know the change was coming, to me, felt very important as an educator, because it wasn't a shock. Kids weren't saying, well, do we come in on Monday or not, Ms. Silverman? We told them, you're not coming in Monday, and here's your computer, and here's how you reach us, and this is what we're going to do, and here's your schedule. And we were able to kind of toggle that switch in a very intentional and, I think, a respectful way for such a traumatizing situation. And then finally, and this one was like probably the most counterintuitive to the staff when I first pushed here, and now they're there and we all agree, was that we challenged ourselves as a learning community to not let go of standards and rigor for kids. Because we had heard, some schools or some young people weren't feeling very challenged by online curriculum. And that had been something we were researching. And so for Broome Street, we adopted a national asynchronous, meaning you can sign on whenever you want, learning platform based off of national course guidelines. And so some teachers were a little scared. They said, well, this is national level, we're New York. And I said, I think our kids can do it. I believe in us. And they did. And so we have seen remarkable adaptation and incredible stories of young people just knocking it out of the park, similar to how Juan David was able to adapt, because I think they were prepared. We're calling them and continuing counseling appointments, but also they're not bored. We're not doing fake instruction. We're doing real high school, but in a virtual and a Zoom in-person kind of way.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. And that prep that you're talking about is I think such a critical piece. And I think a lot of folks, unfortunately, weren't at that place back in mid-March. And I'm curious, you guys have a graduation coming up. Could you tell me about it?
We sure do. And, I had a lot of dreams and plans for all of the ways we wanted to honor this senior class, because they are some truly incredible rock stars. And I know every head of school or principal believes that, but I'm pretty sure that my seniors are the best. And there were senior proms, there were trips, there were plans we had to kind of continue this very boisterous celebration of them. And we were able, and we thought a lot about, do we postpone, do we hold it back? And we decided that we could put together a virtual celebration, which, I invite everybody on this chat to join on June 29th at 10 a.m. And I don't in any way, nothing about that isn't awful. I so want to congratulate young people in person, shake hands, hand them their diploma literally. And that's sad for me as an educator. And I think there's a feeling of a lack of total completion. But on the other hand, the virtual ceremony has some incredible speakers, including Mr. Jeffrey Canada and Miss Lena Waith. And so it's been, for us, an exciting thing to be able to tell young people that we have speakers who, we think resonate with our community's values. So we're excited to honor our young people.
That's great. And as you're thinking to next fall, what are the, I know no one knows, but tell us what you do and don't know.
Well, what we know is that as a school, we're founded on, this concept of connections and compassion lead kids to greatness. And so for us, we won't stop thinking of our relationship with young people that way. And, I described it to somebody as, if you've ever been in a crowd where you're meeting your friend, but you haven't seen them yet, and you get on the phone and you're saying, let me stay on the phone with you until I get there. And then you look at them and then you hang up. That's how I see the educators and our staff at Broome Street Academy. that we are going to stay as connected as we possibly can. And, you know, in fact, we call them so much and they hear from us so much. Sometimes they'll have their 8th or 9th call from Broome Street or Zoom or check-in, and they'll say, oh, you guys, I talk to you more now than I did before. So, you know, that to me is like the cornerstone of that planning. I think we obviously have to stay nimble and agile. For us, it's investing in continuing to align our curriculum to both these national standards, and really hopeful that there'll be some softening up of safety regulations so that we can see young people in person at least once a week. And so, I've been likening it to going to college, where you see your professor once a week, you have deep services where you're on the campus, and then those other days you're off working and you can reach out and you can connect to your supports.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions in chat, and I'm not sure who should take this one, and it's actually one that I had as well, which was, if someone could speak to, and this might be for you, Eric, the recruiting and retention, which are obviously two different things, but just broadly for the door, when you think about, I was thinking, like, are you bringing in any new young people, and what percentage of young people do you think you guys will need to re-engage with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was having a conversation with Renee McConey, who leads our health clinic today, and we were talking about just a myriad of things, and we were talking about what we were the most concerned about from the drop-off, right? And so for folks that are participants at the door, and it's also true for Broome Street Academy, when we have a known quantity, we can and have been over the last 3 months really active in terms of proactively reaching out to folks. So if you just take the health center as an example, we've maintained a really robust level of connectivity from telehealth in terms of mental health visits. And that we've been able to facilitate and keep a continuity going. We've been able to mail folks HIV testing kits. We've been able to mail folks prescriptions. We've done some telehealth medicine. But all of that is because these are folks who are known quantities to us, kids that were known to us, who were actively engaged with us, and that spanned across every division of the door. So where we were able to push in, we were successful. Where I worried most is for kids that used the door as a drop-in center and a community gathering. And so things like food, safe space for homeless youth to shower or get hygiene kits, places where it's less appointment-based, where it was a more casual interaction in terms of when folks were in and out. We worried a ton about the fact that we weren't open and that folks that weren't on our radar, we couldn't be proactive. We started to do virtual enrollment and enrolled a couple hundred kids in the door services virtually, and did as much as we possibly could virtually to keep folks connected. But from a retention standpoint, we're very worried about the disconnect in terms of getting folks back into the building and continuing sort of that robust sense. If you just take the health center as an example, we're at somewhere between 125, 150 visits a week. It's about double when we're operational weekly. So there is that drop off. But I think that there is clearly a retention question. And then I think the flip side to that, Kari, is also that, it's not just about getting back the kids that were consistently with us for what's traditionally multiple reasons. Most kids that touch the door touch 3 or 4 departments of the door when they're with us over the course of a period of time. It's all the new kids that have new issues that are either were exacerbated by COVID or just things that they're just not engaged for. How do we get those folks into the door quickly and promptly? And I think that's a big, big issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question the need is going to be astronomical. I mean, when you think about just, I'm just thinking of all the lists of things that Kavya was going through, and it's like, there's no question that that need is going to be enormous. But yeah, how to sort of bridge those gaps to get people in as you start thinking about scaling up. It's a challenge, but it's so critical.
Right, but just like Kari, Kavya insisted that she doesn't want her lawyers riding around the city on their bike getting folks to sign their papers. On the flip side, I do want to make sure that, as for example, we just build on this health example, I do want to continue to do telemental health. I do want to start to continue to provide continuity and medication to young people around the city, because what we're most concerned about is engagement, depth of programming, and moving kids toward outcomes that are meaningful. And I think if any legacy lesson exists from COVID, is that we probably have to expand our arsenal, predominantly using technology, to make sure that our stickiness with kids continues. And Melissa Silverman would say that from an education perspective. In any case where we can facilitate ongoing retention, and if it uses technology, I think we should continue to do it, and we're going to permanently make it a part of the door.
And I think young people will be more primed for it, as we all are, right? Like we've all sort of had just like gone into the deep end.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
In our home, whatever's. Switching gears, I know every institution is thinking about finances and income. So as you look at the city budget, what's the picture? What makes you worried? What are you happy to hear?
I'm worried. There are three big buckets of revenue that drive the door. It's government money, big corporate and foundation money, and individual contributions. I hope that wealthy New Yorkers continue to stick with the door. I would be more delighted if more wealthy New Yorkers came to champion the door because of how important we are, but at how important we are to the city's recovery. I think the wild card is government money. Last night, Melissa and I met with the Broome Street Academy board, and we spent half the meeting talking about contingency plans if the state reduces the per pupil funding by 5, 10, 15, 20%. 20% reduction in per pupil is a couple $1 million, and schools don't just recover from a $2 million hit by moving the chairs around. So I think that the biggest worry on our end, aside from the macro worry that we're worried that we'll lose revenue and then lose people power to do good, is the government money, because we know that the tax levy went down. We know that the state and city have less to work with. And so they're going to have to cut from somewhere, and we're preparing for it. As of today, we haven't lost a major government contract yet, but we fully expect that the city's pain has the potential to become our pain, and that will be a big deal for us, because from our end, it's just about continuity of programming. And I think the second piece is that we have plans to expand programming in areas where we know that there is an exacerbated need, predicated on what the impact of COVID is. And so while growth is maybe not intuitive when revenue might be reduced, we have plans to sort of do new things, and we want to do it.
Thank you. Kavya, I just wanted to ask you, because I know there may be a decision on DACA tomorrow, and I know that your work, I'm sure, been so important to so many undocumented young people. Could you just tell us how you're preparing to field questions, support your members who may be impacted?
Yeah, so this has been a long fight. When the administration first announced that they would be ending DACA 3 years ago, we did a lot around that. We held town halls, we re-screened individuals who only had DACA to see if they could possibly be eligible for any other type of immigration relief. We did Know Your Rights so that people could feel somewhat safe just going about their lives without status. So we're going to do all of that again, whether it's a positive decision or a negative decision, because the most important initial step is just educating people about what the decision is, what it means for them, and how it might impact their lives in various ways. And so, yeah, we're prepared to do that. I think the biggest thing is we want to be there to support our young people. That's something that we in legal have been focusing on a lot over the past couple of years, is expanding the mental health supports we provide for immigrant youth, recognizing how especially vulnerable they are. So we have support groups in the 3 languages that are primarily spoken by our youth: English, Spanish, and French. And we use those support groups as a way to talk about like anything that's going on for our young people, but definitely for any major sort of new major sort of developments in immigration law, that comes up a lot, and the support groups are a great place for our young people to talk about things. We also recently this year, which is really exciting, we got funding for a full-time policy managing attorney on the legal team, which has been like a really exciting way for the department to grow. And so we're planning to organize around this. If it's a bad decision, you know, we really hope that we're going to be able to fight back and advocate, because even if the Supreme Court gives us a bad decision, that doesn't mean we're at the end of the road. It just means we have to turn to lawmakers, and we can still make the change happen. And now I think the door is in a good place to actually take the lead on some of that and push for that work. And then finally, this is a smaller thing. One of our clients, a wonderful 22-year-old young woman from Peru who is a DACA recipient, has penned a really, really powerful op-ed about her experience as a dreamer, you know, grappling with what the American dream means for her. And we are very much hoping to find a way of publishing that, you know, in connection with the decision, whatever it might be.
And in just the final minutes to, I'm wondering if the door has anything planned for Pride. I know Pride is always an important time for all of New York, but I'm curious if anyone has anything to report back on Pride.
Yeah, Eric, do you want me to take that one?
Why don't you start? I have one sort of concluding point, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, so we've been doing a lot. We participated in the Queen's Virtual Pride Festival. We've got a mini documentary series called Love that's about like door pride. We're going to be in the Bronx Virtual Pride Festival next week. And we've been doing a summer-long social media campaign called I Am Proud Of. So that's really designed to celebrate individuality and embrace community, both in like the more traditional ways we think about pride and more broadly than that. So we're doing our best to make it happen virtually.
Just to say that anybody who wants to be part of our I Am Proud Of campaign should do it. We've been reaching out to all the supporters of the door to sort of get involved in it. And Pride's usually just such an electric and remarkable atmosphere when we're in person. And this year we're just making sure that we keep it going, despite the fact that it's a new way of celebrating. We certainly won't be on a float this year.
I just want to say how inspired I am to hear all of the work that you're doing. And I think of, you know, just both the hardship that the young people and the communities you're serving, and also your staff, just what a time this has been. So I just want to thank you for all of your work for New York. It means so much. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. Do you have any final words, Eric? Or you?
Just to say, I mean, you know, the second that COVID hit, we made a decision to be as aggressive as we possibly could to tell the story of the remarkable staff and young people that make up the community of the door. And we'll continue to do that. This is another way of doing exactly that. The door card, you said it right. It's a unique New York institution made up of 350 staff and over 10,000 young people who every year try to advance the world. And I think as part of the recovery, both from the issues around race and what's cooking around COVID, there's probably no more important youth organization in the city that's sort of just bearing down and getting ready to be active and aggressive and thoughtful in terms of how we're central to the recovery of the city. And we're just thankful to folks who are interested and committed and participatory in how we're leading. And we're gracious. We're just grateful that folks are with us. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me and my colleagues who represent a great, great team. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kari. Thanks, everybody.